Captain Mustarian once told me, if the hangover came before the drunkenness, drinking would be a virtue. That's pretty much how I'd describe our days of dehydration under that merciless Australian sun. It all started with a headache. Callie and I knew we were in trouble. We knew a human being couldn't survive more than 3 to 4 days without water. The military guys knew it too. They started by sectioning off any hallways with vending machines, which, statistically speaking, made us all safer. The electricity didn't work anymore, and so nothing was cold, but surviving on warm Fanta and Coke was still surviving. Soldiers with firearms rationed out vending machine goodies, but the quantities quickly dwindled from 3 cans per day to 1. When the supplies ran out at a neighboring building, the people there removed doors from their hinges and began paddling over to our building. They lay on the doors on their stomachs like how you'd lie on a surfboard and paddle out to sea. The soldiers ordered them to turn back. Then someone started shooting. That's when the rations stopped. It was nothing personal, just that self-preservation had kicked in. We never felt in any danger from the soldiers. They never threatened us. If anything, they treated us with a sort of mild neglect, seeming much more interested in scheduling shifts and standing watch and taking orders from whoever was around and in charge. All this routine seemed to interest them even more than the thirst, which was growing. Kelly and I could see people on a few nearby buildings. The accountants were the first to drink seawater. Soon thereafter, the people on top of the adjacent building were drinking it too. The same people who tried to row over to our building only to get turned back under gunfire. And by the time the soldiers started filling empty pop cans with seawater and drinking their own urine, I knew I had to try something. And yet, I waited, like everyone else, for rescue. Callie and I were fortunate enough to wake up during a brief nighttime shower and have the wherewithal not to flop around with our tongues out and our mouths open. Instead, we tore the tops off aluminum pop cans, which we'd been smart enough to keep, and let the rainwater collect. Then we hid our pop cans and kept quiet. When no one was looking, we drank the water, the only fresh water on the rooftop, all to ourselves, the only people we trusted. And when Callie wasn't looking, I washed down my pills. This one Aussie soldier, I remember he came up to Callie and me believing us to be his parents, and he said, "Hey, Mom and Dad, have you any lager in the fridge?" Wrapped in my pants leg, below the knee where my fake leg should have been, I had 3 cans worth of fresh, clear rainwater. Instead, I handed him the same tin cup I'd watched him fill with seawater not a minute earlier. The same cup I'd watched him piss in all day. "Rippa," this soldier said, taking a huge gulp, and, almost the second the seawater touched his lips, vomiting, right back into the cup. I'd seen the same thing once in a police video meant to deter kids from drinking alcohol. This test subject sat in an interrogation room across from a panel of officers who watched as he recycled 5 cups of Miller Lite before they stopped him. He just kept puking it over and over into the same red plastic cup and placing the cup down on the table as though he'd finished. Then he'd forget any of this had happened and ask for another Miller Lite. The officers just kept sliding the same red plastic cup back across the table. And yeah, to be fair, I've never been able to drink 1 Miller Lite without puking. But while the test subject would suffer his hangover during the subsequent days, the Aussie soldier had already experienced those symptoms. The dry mouth, the headaches, the nausea, the dehydration. A hangover before the drunkenness, I'd later think. Captain Mustarian's definition of virtue. And the rewards of this virtue did not end with delirium. Oh no, this virtuous Aussie soldier was dead before morning. By the time our secret rainwater had run out, no one was moving anymore, save for the occasional twitch. I remember smiling at Kelly, sleeping on her side. I remember trying not to think about anything, though I kept wondering what had gone wrong with the world, and which animals would eat our bodies first. The last thing I remember is a little hazy, but I'm pretty sure I was wandering around on the rooftop, calling out that dead Aussie soldier's name, whatever it was. Not so much because I wanted to find him, as because I wanted to find his parents. I remember feeling absolutely certain that they had cold lager tucked away somewhere. I awoke to the sensation of the POW hospital moving at an incredible speed. I mean, especially for a building. Through the water, and then over something. Whatever we'd hit was big enough to cause a horrible grinding, bending steel sound. Not big enough to bring the hospital to a halt, but pretty big. It was dark, and when I sat up, the lights came on via motion sensors. I wasn't baking in the sun anymore. There was air conditioning. I was in a large bed in a cabin suite. I recognized the wallpaper and carpet patterns immediately. The Pacific Princess 2. Someone had rescued me, bathed me, attended to my sunburn with some sort of salve, and funneled water down my throat. But where was Callie? As the ship slowed and turned so that we were heading back around for whatever we'd hit, I threw the sheets back and did a double take at my attire. Black leather pants covered my legs, and a white, billowy shirt with a plunging neckline flanked on either side by a black leather vest with lots of tiny pockets and zippers and chrome rivets covered my torso. I shook my head, felt a scarf wrapped around it as though to hold back my hair. The ends of the scarf tickled the back of my neck as I kicked at the sheets and spun myself into a sitting position. That's when I saw the peg leg. And then, before I had time to mull over my appearance, there were people running down the corridor past my room. The door was closed, but I could hear them, and I could see their outlines through the curtains of the narrow window running the length of the door. Seconds later, in the distance, I heard shouting and men fighting, as though with baseball bats and chains. I heard gunshots, and that got me to my feet, or to my foot and peg leg. I looked around for my real fake leg, but no luck, no time. I discovered I could waddle quite quickly for someone unaccustomed to walking on a piece of wood, which I'd later find out was only wood for the last 6 inches. The rest being a custom welded steel frame hinged at the knee and secured with straps I could only describe as something out of an S&M porno flick. The wooden piece turned out to be a billy club of the traditional Australian Army variety, which the manufacturer, a guy named Gustav, had added solely for effect. I unlocked the door and speed waddled out onto the main deck, where only moments earlier I'd heard the commotion. A thick fog obscured all but 10 feet or so in front of me as I moved, thud, tap, thud, across the thick wooden planks. At first I thought I was alone, but then, running at me from out of the fog, came a man brandishing a machete. He ran with his mouth open, like he was screaming without making any noise. I didn't hear his footsteps, didn't hear his clothes jangling, but when he swung that machete at my neck, I heard it swish through the air. I heard it stop in the palm of my mechanical hand as I caught it, and I heard it groan and squeal as I bent the machete to one side and yanked it out of this silent, screaming man's grasp. We both just stood there in front of one another, staring, me at his empty pistol holder, him at his own hand. He looked at his hand like it had betrayed him. Then he looked up from his hand to the machete, now held the wrong way in the grip of my bloodless fingers, and with that, I came to my senses. This asshole had just tried to decapitate me. My face scowled up into a ball, and I started beating this fool about the head with the hilt of his own weapon. It took a half dozen good whacks before he turned and ran back the way he'd come, back into the fog and right onto the tip of Captain Mystarian's sword. I heard a wet sloshing sound as Captain Mystarian dug his blade through the man's gut and upwards, as though to drive it right up his throat and out his mouth. And I remember seeing him, Captain Mystarian, peeking over the man's shoulder at me and smiling and twisting, once, twice, and then sploosh. Another memorable sound as Captain Mystarian removed his sword, the whole time patting the man on the back like they just finished a friendly game of rugby. Nice game, well played, and so forth. Flicking the blood and other remains from his blade, and still smiling, Captain Mystarian walked towards me, his free hand extending as, behind him, the man slumped to the deck, quite dead, in a pile of his own guts. And my mechanical hand extended automatically again. Aha! Captain Mystarian announced. Rippa indeed! And then, taking my real human hand and pulling me off balance into his chest so we were hugging, he said, I tell you, mate, laughing into my ear, you make a right fine pirate.